Okay, it looks like the numbers have leveled off a bit, so I'm going to get started. And I'm so pleased to see so many people attending today. My name is Kathy Baskin. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for MassDEP's Bureau of Water Resources. So welcome. We are pleased to provide you an update today on two studies that have been going on in 2004 and 2005. And we're really pleased to share this information with you today. We have consultants. Our consulting team is online today, along with MassDEP staff. The consulting team is Ty and Bond with Brown and Caldwell, and our engineers from the team are Bill Brower with Brown and Caldwell, and Todd Brown with Ty and Bond, who will be speaking today, but they were supported by a number of other talented folks who helped us with our studies. So in 2004, MassDEP, we were provided with funds to evaluate sludge disposal capacity, factors that affect disposal, PFAS reduction, and treatment technologies. And we called that study we looked at where the sludge is being generated and where it's going to. And this is a very near-term look at sludge capacity and how we handle things today. That we call part one. I call it state of the state of sludge, so that we have an idea of where we're at with respect to land application, landfilling, incineration, and where our vulnerabilities are in terms of our capacities and our dependence on certain types of practices. Part two, which is ongoing right now, part one has a report that's on our MassDEP's website, and we'll put the link out for folks if you'd like to see that. Part two is ongoing right now, so we're sharing preliminary results with you on the intersection of sludge and PFAS, and how legislative and policy decisions regulating PFAS might affect sludge disposal capacity, how technology related to PFAS reduction and destruction might assist. That report will be finalized later this year in the summer. So I want to thank our consultants for all the hard work that they've put into this project, the valuable information that they brought to the table as MassDEP tackles this very complex issue of biosolids management. I also would like to thank the key staff from MassDEP who have participated on both studies. So Leldon Langley is the division director of watershed management, and he leads the team, along with David Boyer, who is our section chief for wastewater, and Jennifer Wood, who's an engineer in our NIPDES program, and Kaylee Gibbs, who's an environmental analyst in our NIPDES program. So together they have formed the backbone of what the study should look like, where we're going with it. And I'll note that MassDEP is continuing to fund other work. We're just launching a study right now to look at wastewater influent, affluent, and sludge with respect to PFAS concentrations. So we're still in the midst of getting a better handle on what it looks like out there with respect to sludge generation, what the wastewater looks like, and what the possible options are for us to consider. So welcome. I'm going to turn it over to, I think Jennifer Wood will give us some logistical guidelines for today's meeting.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, as Kathy said. Want to let you all know that the presentation will be recorded. The slides will be posted on MassDEP's website following the presentation, and attendees will be notified. To minimize background noise, attendees are on mute. And please enter questions in the Q&A and include your full name and affiliation with your question. Thank you and enjoy the presentation.
All right, thank you, Jennifer and Kathy. My name is Todd Brown, and I am from Ty and Bond, representing a much larger team, as Kathy indicated. And I will be summarizing part one and talking about part of part two. As Kathy said, the part one report is available on the MassDEP website. And we will also, today, we'll be talking about where we are with the part two report. Part one is summarized by this overview slide that shows in the blue in the bottom right-hand corner, those blue dots represent the 128 POTWs that were generating sludge in 2023, and the lines in the center of the diagram represent where that sludge is traveling to. The orangish, brownish lines are dewatered sludge cake that is being transported to landfills, incinerators, and biosolids processing facilities, as you can see, around the region. And the blue lines represent liquid sludge transport within the, largely within the Commonwealth. In the rest of my discussions today, I refer to this as the sludge management network that we have. And in the bottom left-hand corner, to sort of quantify things, in total for the year in 2023, there were about 165,700 dry tons of sludge generated statewide, and 39% of that was processed and land applied, 37% incinerated in Mass, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, and 14% landfilled in New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. The destinations for the land applied biosolids are indicated on the next slide. And on the left side of this slide are the facilities that process the biosolids. The height of the bar next to the facility represents are proportional to the dry tons that they process. And on the right side are the destination states where those processed biosolids are sent for land application. And the key takeaways here are that at the top left, we have primarily smaller compost facilities, often at the individual treatment plant, that ship largely to Massachusetts locations. GLSD is the Greater Lawrence Sanitary District, and MWRA is the Mass Water Resources Authority. And both of those facilities dry their solids into a pellet form, and those get distributed more widely. And then the remaining two, the Grassland facility and the Hawk Ridge facility, are privately owned and operated facilities that process biosolids for land application as well. The next slide shows us another thing that we need to bear in mind as we look at sludge management options, and that is the greenhouse gas emissions associated with each sludge management endpoint. As we can see, that the processed biosolids that get land applied are represented by compost, drying, and alkaline stabilization in the blue columns, and the end disposal of using incineration or landfills and monofills are indicated in orange. And the greenhouse gas emission impact on a dry ton basis is indicated in the y-axis. And we can see that incineration has about double the greenhouse gas impact of the land application options, and landfilling and monofilling is more than 4 times the greenhouse gas impact. And that just means that as the policymakers are contemplating the restrictions on land application to protect the public health from PFAS, they also need to recognize and consider the adverse environmental and public health impacts of shifting the sludge management options from the land application toward incineration and landfilling. So in summary, the part one summary, I hope we covered a very large study very quickly, but the takeaways are that this is a very fragile network. There is essentially no spare capacity within this network to handle upsets in the system, nor to absorb additional sludge that is expected through population growth. In fact, in just a few years, we expect, or in part one, projected that there will be an additional 12,000 dry tons produced that really we can't identify where it's going to go. And in fact, we saw with the elimination of land application in Connecticut, there are already shuffles within there. And when we look at the incineration capacity, these facilities are older. Their age is measured in decades, not just single years. And they're operating at capacity. And the land application is also at capacity, and landfills, we're not building many more in the region, and the capacity is getting used up. So it is fragile. So moving on to part two, with this understanding of the existing situation, what we're trying to do in part two is look at, well, now what happens when we start thinking about PFAS, and what is PFAS going to do to impact this sludge management network, right, in the short term and longer term. And we do that by looking at the regulatory landscape in Massachusetts and beyond. We are looking at ways we can reduce PFAS levels, both upstream of the treatment plants and at the treatment plants, either in sludge or in the wastewater. We look at sludge volume reduction technologies that are available to sort of reduce the overall volume of sludge that needs to be managed. And then we provide some considerations for the treatment plants themselves and for the regulators and legislators that are working on this problem. It's very important to recognize that this study does not address the public health impacts. It is not a health risk assessment, quantitative health risk assessment. It's focused on the sludge management technologies, and it sort of has sort of the qualitative approach that if we can get PFAS concentration lower, that's better. Okay, that's going to be a lower risk, but it is not the scope of this study to try to quantify that. So how can PFAS impact sludge and biosolids? Well, on the landfill side, we worry about leachate contamination, potential for soil and water contamination, even though they're generally in lined landfills. And the fact that PFAS is persistent and mobile. On the land application side, we worry about the soil and water contamination and entering the uptake into plants through bioaccumulation. On the incineration, we worry about forming hazardous byproducts and the air emissions and ash residue. Where can we take action? Well, this figure represents the treatment plant. I never defined POTW, and I apologize for that. POTW means publicly owned treatment works, and it's sort of what we refer to as the municipal wastewater treatment plant or municipal water resource recovery facility. We use those terms, or I use those terms synonymously. But when we look at this, the plant is in the middle, and what is coming into the plant is shown on the left-hand side, and what leaves the plant is shown on the right-hand side. And we can intervene with PFAS in many points along within this this flow pattern. And the report, in fact, does that. And these numbers represent the section of the report that addresses it. But we'll talk about a few of these today. I'm going to focus sort of on the left side, and my colleague Bill is going to focus on the right side. So what can we do upstream of the treatment plant? Well, to assess this, we first needed to review PFAS data on the influent, effluent, and sludge that has been reported to the MassDEP PFAS data portal by treatment plants that have had this as part of their NPDES permit, that they are required to do this sampling. In addition, some other facilities who are not required have begun the process of quantifying these things, and they provided data to us as well. So we looked at a lot of data and well, before I get into that, the reason we can do this is because there is existing regulatory authority for treatment plants to regulate what is coming into the plant from industrial sources, so that it does not adversely affect their operations, either in terms of the biology or their sludge management practices. So they can regulate it, but will that work in Massachusetts? So then in the data, the database is populated with the concentrations of 40 individual PFAS for each sample collected, for the majority of the data that has been input into that. The samples are grab samples that are collected at the treatment plant for influent, effluent, and sludge. And in some cases, individual plants have begun to characterize the discharges from industry into their facilities. When we've evaluated all that data, we find some interesting trends, and that the top 8 species of PFAS that show up are the same in influent and effluent, and they show up frequently. More than 50%, the majority of the samples collected have these 8 compounds in them. When you look at the sludge, however, some are the same, but there are different PFAS species that show up at high frequency. And then in the weeds of the samples, we also see individual spikes of an individual species at a particular plant. And if you're looking at those on an individual plant basis, they would raise questions about, is there a unique discharger within my service area that we should be looking at? Was there a sludge discharge from something, or was it potentially a sampling or analysis error? But what we're finding is that these compounds are showing up regardless of whether industry is present, and that sort of implies that the kind of ubiquitous nature of PFAS. To take a closer look at that, we were able to do sort of a mass balance at a few of the plants that have gathered enough data from all of the industries that's discharged to the plants. And we have some flow information that we were able to calculate a mass loading from those industries, compare it to the mass loading in the plant influent. And at this particular treatment plant, we can see that the mass load in milligrams per day of 11 species of PFAS in the influent, represented by the blue columns, and the industrial loading represented by the gray columns, and then the red diamonds indicate the percent of the influent loading represented by the industrial loading. And at this treatment plant, the industrial contributions for these individual species, on some of them, a few of them, approach 40% of the POTW influent. So at this plant, it likely does make sense to explore source reduction through industrial pretreatment as a means to meaningfully reduce the influent PFAS load to the plant. On the other hand, the next plant that we looked at showed, as you can see here, the same loading. The industrial loading at this plant is quite low. And with the exception of one compound on the far right, we would expect not to have much success in lowering influent concentrations by addressing industrial loads. So if it's not industry, then it is likely originating from homes and businesses, which lead to other means of source control or treatment. Now, my colleague Bill Brower from Brown and Caldwell will discuss addressing the PFAS at other intervention points within the plant. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. So as Todd said, he kind of focused on upstream, and then what I'm going to talk about more is when the treatment at the wastewater treatment plant or the POTW, either on the sludge side or wastewater. So we looked at a range of different technologies. We looked at PFAS treatment technologies for sludge, for biosolids. also for like full plant flow in the liquid stream, and also for leachate. I'm not going to talk about leachate today, but it is in the report. I'm also going to talk about volume reduction technologies. Todd touched on this a little bit earlier, but for sludge, these are technologies like dewatering and drying and digestion that reduce the amount of material to be managed on the back end. So they don't directly impact PFAS, but they do reduce the overall amount of material produced. So starting first with those volume reduction technologies, we focused on mature technologies that have been used for many decades in the US and around the world. So dewatering, so it's taking thickened sludge that solids that you're pulling out of the liquid stream at the wastewater treatment plant. That's what wastewater treatment plants do. They pull out solids and so the liquid stream could be nice and clean when it goes out into the receiving body. So taking those solids and then dewatering them, getting out a fair amount of the water. We chose some representative technologies there that are kind of widely used in this area. There are others, but these are kind of representative. We also looked at anaerobic digestion. This is putting those solids into a large tank without air for a long period of time, and you generate biogas, which could be beneficially used. And that biogas is solids that otherwise would have gone off as solids, but now they're converted to gas. So you have fewer solids on the back end. And then thermal drying can be on the back end of dewatering and or digestion. And that's just kind of putting it through various technologies that will heat it up and get off most all of the remaining water. So looking at these technologies, you'll see a few graphs that look like this. In the upper right, you see the kind of breakdown of the size of POTWs, or the size of wastewater treatment plants that we did. So small facilities, this is less than 0.5 MGD, so million gallons a day. That's a pretty small facility. Medium facilities greater than 5 MGD. Medium large is 10 MG, less than 10 MGD, so between 5 and 10. And large facilities are those with over 10 MGD. You can see the breakdown of how many facilities of each type there are in the Commonwealth. So these graphs are showing the net present cost for implementing these technologies. So this is the upfront capital cost plus 20 years of operations and maintenance costs for these. So things like increased labor, chemicals, electricity, natural gas, whatever. That is all kind of thrown in here. And you bring those back to $2024 and you get the total 20-year life cycle cost of implementing these different technologies. So starting on the left, you've got dewatering, and I'm showing the percent mass reduction versus just thickening. So with dewatering, you get out a fair amount of the water. So screw press and centrifuge are our representative technologies there. Digestion, again, you're getting rid of some of those solids are being converted into biogas that could be beneficially used. And dryers, you're getting nearly all of the water off. Range of different technologies here. For small facilities, we didn't look at anaerobic digestion rotary drum dryers because they just really don't pencil out at that scale. And for large facilities, we assumed that they already had dewatering, so those aren't included. So you'll see 3 bars for some and 4 for others. But this was just an effort to give POTWs and others around the state an idea of how much typically these technologies cost to implement over time. And we have got further breakdowns in the report on specific capital costs and O&M costs. And these are costs that include things like an additional building and ancillary equipment and things like that. So, but as you can see, implementing these technologies is expensive. And these are the costs per facility. This isn't rolled up for the whole state or anything. This is cost for a typical facility of these sizes. So then now moving on to PFAS treatment technologies. So these are things like pyrolysis gasification and SQO, or supercritical water oxidation. So first for sludge treatment, these are technologies that are a little more emerging, but these are the 3 that EPA and others have found to be kind of the most effective thus far for showing PFAS removal and are getting some commercial penetration into the market. So you can see the same concept here: 20-year life cycle cost, a capital cost plus 20 years of O&M costs brought back to current dollars. And you can see a range of costs there for these different technologies. And again, small facilities weren't included because these technologies just aren't really sized, or they tend to be too large for that small of a facility. On the wastewater side, so this is the liquid stream. So if you were to try and put on PFAS treatment at the end of the plant, on the effluent before it goes out into the receiving water body, so the full treatment flow. So if it's a 10 MGD facility, it'd be 10 MGD of 10 million gallons per day going through these technologies. We looked at a couple of different technologies: granular activated carbon, ion exchange resin, and then the 2 in series. And again, net present costs for these different technologies. Lots more details on this in the report, but these are the kind of the high level costs. So there was also in our scope was taking a look at retrofitting existing sewage sludge incinerators for PFAS mitigation. The fate and transport of PFAS through these high temperature incinerators that are specifically for sewage sludge. There's some initial research that's been done by my colleague Lloyd Winchell and others that is showing that there's definite reductions through these technologies, but there's still a lot more work to be done. So existing facilities, there are 2 sewage sludge incinerators in Massachusetts, Upper Blackstone Clearwater and Clean Water and Lynn. Both facilities have technologies on the back end of their emissions. Upper Blackstone has a thermal oxidizer. Lynn has activated carbon system. Both of those systems are known to reduce PFAS, and they might reduce PFAS to sufficiently just with their current equipment. Really can't know till the limits are set, and 2, we know kind of how efficiently their particular technologies are reducing PFAS. But in our scope was looking at what if you did need to put in a emissions control on the back end of an incinerator on the airstream to specifically reduce PFAS. So these would be the technology we looked at was regenerative thermal oxidizer, kind of the state of the industry best practice for reducing air emissions for PFAS. Upper Blackstone is on the order of 3 times larger than Lynn, so the bars are higher, but it's a larger facility. So you're seeing here the capital cost, about 30 million for Upper Blackstone and 10 for Lynn, and then the annual O&M cost. And to give a way of kind of putting that in context, the $3 million for Upper Blackstone, that's the estimated annual O&M operations and maintenance costs additional for putting in this regenerative thermal oxidizer on the back end. That compares to $21 million, which is their total 2025 operations and maintenance budget. So, this implementing these technologies would be a 15% or so increase to the overall budget of these facilities. And that doesn't take into account the capital costs, any bond payments that need to be made or whatever. All right, so this graph takes a second to explain, but if you'll stick with me, I think we can get there. So these are all the technologies we just talked about. Starting on the left with the wastewater PFAS treatment technology, so the liquid stream technologies at the wastewater treatment plant. In the middle, sludge volume reduction technologies, dewatering, digestion, drying. And on the right, sludge PFAS treatment technology. So all the technologies we were just talking about at the same POTW sizes. What we did is we took the annual cost of these and we wanted to normalize them somehow. So we took those annual costs from the annual operation and maintenance budget plus an annual capital cost. So assuming a bond amount, bond payments at a particular interest rate, what's the annual cost of those? And then we divided that by the typical number of the technical term is equivalent residential units, but essentially the number of households or the number of bill payers in a service area of that size for that facility. So essentially looking at the annual cost of these technologies per ratepayer is a way to think of it. And then we compared that to the existing median water and sewer bill rates for a facility of that size in Massachusetts. I'll note that that's their combined bill for both drinking water and sewer. And here we're just talking about, something that's at the wastewater treatment plant on the sewer side. But if you compare those, and we divided those, so the annualized cost per household essentially divided by what they're paying currently, and that's what these numbers are showing. So essentially, the 100% here means that the annual cost of implementing these technologies is in effect kind of doubling the existing water and sewer rate for those utilities. Wouldn't exactly kind of work out that way, and this doesn't take into account federal or state grants or other things that could reduce the capital costs. We wanted to normalize these somehow to give people an idea of kind of the impact that this could have ultimately on ratepayers. So you can see that for many of these technologies, it's going to have an impact on water and sewer rates that are above what is typically the increases to water and sewer rates, which for many facilities, even their existing rate increases aren't enough often to cover existing increasing costs and things like that.
Excuse me, Bill, I see somebody has his hand up, Michael O'Keefe. And so we are taking clarifying questions on the slides so that people can fully understand what we're talking about. And any kind of question, answer, or policy discussion we'll take up after the presentation. So I am going to let Michael ask his question. Go ahead, Michael.
Sorry, that was a mistake. I didn't.
Okay, great to hear from you.
Yeah, but if others have questions, I know I'm going quickly. We're trying to get through a lot of material. So yeah, please do raise your hand if you have clarifying questions.
Absolutely. We want to make sure this is a lot of material coming at you. We want to make sure that you understand it so that we can have a really fruitful conversation at the end. So, okay.
All right. Okay, so then wanted to also give some context for, Massachusetts isn't in a bubble. So looking at the federal things that have been going on at the federal level and also in surrounding states. So in 2024, PFOA and PFAS, two of the most common PFAS compounds, were designated as hazardous substances under CERCLA. The impact of that is unclear for the impacts to sludge management and to wastewater treatment in general. And just a couple of weeks ago, the EPA released their draft biosolids risk assessment. We could talk more about that if folks want, but it's not a regulation, though typically a risk assessment would be kind of the first step on the route towards regulation. Unclear what the change in administration is going to do to this process. That's unclear. But their results of this draft risk assessment showed potential human health impacts from all the biosolids management options that are typical and that we've been talking about today. So for incineration, for landfilling, and for land application, they were finding potential human health impacts based on their modeling that they did in this study. And the land application analysis in particular focused not on kind of the general population, but on those directly adjacent or living at biosolids land application sites. But this wasn't kind of for the general public. Happy to talk about more about that, but that's kind of the federal level overview. Looking at what kind of other states have done, the approach that other states have taken to this, when legislatures have acted about PFAS, it's resulted in a ban. So in Maine and Connecticut, there wasn't much land application to begin with, though non-zero, and there was sludge from Massachusetts. It was going, or biosolids from Massachusetts. It was going into Connecticut. And in Maine, their land application ban, coupled with some other legislation, really caused quite a challenge in Maine, which we could talk more about. Other states that have regulated PFAS and where the regulator has come up with an approach has typically been this tiered approach. I think Michigan was the first ones to do it, but generally there's a level under which if you're PFAS and or PFOA, those particular chemical compounds, if they're below a certain level, typically around 20 parts per billion, then there's no additional restrictions on land application of biosolids. Somewhere in the middle, 20 to 50 or 100, there tends to be some restrictions of trying to find PFAS users in your industrial system, like Tom was talking about, or reducing application rates. And then there's a level at which, typically in the 50 to 100-ish level, where land application of biosolids is not allowed. So that's the approach that New York has taken, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Maryland. It's not on here, but Colorado. And I'll point out Vermont as well. Vermont has lower levels and more compounds than just PFOA and PFAS. In Vermont, folks are you can reduce your land application rate to get below these levels. You can also blend with other materials to get the resulting blend below these levels and then continue to apply. So based on everything we were seeing and the analysis that we've talked about today, we came up with some options that POTWs in the Commonwealth can consider, and also for the state to consider. So first of all, looking at options that the POTWs consider to kind of address this. So we came up with a range of these options, and as a way to just kind of give an idea of prioritization or just different ways to characterize them. We show the potential timelines, so kind of how quickly these different things could be implemented, their potential to increase sludge management options, their potential to reduce PFAS, their relative cost, and then some comments that just help clarify. The key on the upper left you'll see is light blue is low up to darker blue is high. This is obviously subjective, but there are things like, putting in some of these technologies we talk about are going to be more costly than kind of your regular monitoring and reporting. So we're just trying to give a rough level here and acknowledge that this is very subjective. So the kinds of things that we brought up that POTWs could consider, like Todd was talking about, undertaking local PFAS source reduction through the industrial pretreatment programs. But as he was showing that, we'll get some facilities that can definitely have an impact, but what this work has shown is that there are, for some facilities, there's enough of a load coming from households and commercial outlets that there's still going to be a significant PFAS load even after industrial users are reduced. Regular monitoring and reporting, just so people have an idea of what their PFAS levels are and how their different interventions upstream are impacting the plant. Reducing sludge volume, so this is implementing things like dewatering, digestion, drying that we talked about, just having fewer solids to manage. There's just kind of less risk for the utility if they have fewer solids to manage on the back end. And then committing to regional facilities. We haven't talked much about this, but there's a fair amount of interest in Massachusetts and in New England and around the country for regional facilities specifically for biosolids treatment. As we saw, these technologies are very expensive to implement. So with economies of scale, there's an obvious advantage to regional facilities. Comes down to governance and how these things are set up and various things. But POTWs committing to regional facilities that are being proposed, saying, I will bring you my tonnage, is something that can help to make these facilities come to fruition. And then for legislatures and regulators in Massachusetts, options that they can consider to help address these issues. First here is establishing PFAS limits for biosolids land applications. So similar to other states, most states have taken this tiered approach to kind of restricting the biosolids with the highest PFAS concentrations, and then allowing land application to continue for solids that have very low levels of PFAS. The state can also provide regulatory certainty for PFAS treatment technologies. The vendors of these technologies, it really helps them to develop projects if they're very clear of what the regulatory requirements are going to be and kind of what regulatory timelines are going to be. So the state can provide some clarity so that folks know going in kind of what this process is going to look like. The state level can implement PFAS source control measures, like many states have banned consumer products containing PFAS and manufacturing processes that involve PFAS. So that's the role the state can play to get at some of those POTWs like Todd showed, where the PFAS load was not necessarily come from industry, but kind of just from all of us in our day-to-day lives. Support volume reduction in PFAS treatment projects, the second to last line there. So like we've been talking about, there's a role that the state can play. These are very expensive projects typically to implement. So there's often a role for state funding, particularly for these technologies, either, kind of dewatering, drying, digestion, volume reduction technologies, or PFAS treatment. And then helping to promote regional facilities. The state can play a real critical role in the fate of these of regional facilities. So providing that regulatory clarity for how these different technologies will be regulated, both at a POTW or potentially at a third-party site. And there's just going to be a role for funding that the state could provide to help promote these regional facilities. With that, I will pass it to Leldon, who's going to talk through some conclusions.
Thank you, Bill. So I'm just going to try to address a few of the conclusions that have been identified by the report. As some of you have heard me say where during the week at a conference that MassDEP does continue to be in conversation with the legislature, and that the commissioning of this study and the collection of information in it is intended to help us with a more informed way to have that conversation with the legislature and others, so that we hopefully can construct policy that does not have unintended consequences. Regarding the first one and source control measures, one of the things that DP started doing in the early as 2019 was collecting data in different media that we are regulating in the wastewater programs. When we consider problems at DEP, I often ask my staff, what's the universe? How big is this problem? Is it one facility or is it everywhere? And from the data collection we've done to date, we now understand that the nature of PFAS is that it is ubiquitous in our environment in a variety of different media. We have relied upon the industrial pretreatment program. Some of the studies that we've commissioned have allowed us to trace sources of the PFAS and help to find them in sewage collection systems by identifying, by going up the system and finding them in pump stations that will help us to locate where the source of the PFAS is coming from. And sorry guys, I have a cold and I sound more like Lauren Bacall today than I do myself. So another method we are using is the Office of Technical Assistance is providing assistance to some facilities that have industrial sources. Some have been identified, such as short paper fiber and metal finishing manufacturers who are known sources, and the Office of Technical Assistance, which is a confidential confidential agency that works. The agency that works confidentially with industrial users is helping those users to identify alternatives to using PFAS in their processes. Regarding the second bullet, establishing PFAS sludge limits for land application, we do recognize that land application provides a potential pathway for groundwater contamination. We believe that the review of current regulations and consideration of limits on PFAS in sludge is necessary, and that is underway. However, we also believe that it's appropriate through the planning process, this master plan that we've commissioned, to understand, the problem and some of the ramifications of it, to help us make more informed decisions. So, as you've heard today from review of the study, that there are cost considerations, there are distance and disposal capacity considerations, and these things are important to us to also take into consideration as we consider the proper operation and management of publicly owned treatment works and the cost to them and their ratepayers as they try to address this problem. So we believe that the study is helping us to have that kind of an informed conversation, particularly with people who may be helping to making law. Establishing volume reduction facilities. This would help control costs and it would provide reduced volume for disposal or treatment. It does, however, present some siting and funding issues, but we believe that this is an excellent recommendation. And some of you this week at the NUIA conference heard quite a bit about how volume reduction can be helpful. The next bullet talks about providing regulatory certainty for PFAS treatment technologies. Over the years, I've been in a number of conversations about new technologies that are emerging. And while it is also always helpful for us to be able to offer clarity to technology proponents, permittees who come to us and ask for the permitting to help them understand the permitting pathway, it's sometimes more complicated than it would appear. Statutes are written broadly. Regulations are often written with specific known technologies in mind. And so it sometimes takes quite a bit of effort to understand the waste streams that may be involved with new technologies, and then to interpret the law and applicable regulations and determine if they and existing permit applications that we've already created and understand if they can be used to address the new technology, and if so, how, or whether some type of revision to regulation, policy, or permit applications is necessary. The next bullet talks about facilitating piloting and support funding of full-scale projects of emerging technologies. I'd like to say that, there's a very successful model for piloting technologies at the Massachusetts Septic Test Center. That facility has been in operation for probably more than 2 decades now, and useful information is constantly being generated. So it acts as a good model for others, one of which is BioHub, which is being talked about now as a potential piloting facility for current, for PFAS technologies. Those would also present certain challenges in siting and permitting and ensuring that there are proper risk management measures in place at such facilities. And then finally, supporting developing regional facilities through regulatory guidance and funding. We believe that regional facilities can be cost efficient. They can serve facilities of varying sizes, small, medium, and large POTWs. We're hopeful that this study will help the legislature to understand the utility of having such regional facilities in place, and potentially develop funding sources for those kinds of facilities. And I would just note that regional facilities also require municipal cooperation, intermunicipal cooperation, which can sometimes be challenging. So that concludes the remarks on the conclusion slide. And I'll turn it back over to Kathy or the rest of the team for managing the discussion.